Well, it's my pleasure to be a part of this excellent panel. We have some really seasoned experts in M&A and from different sides. We have two entrepreneur company leaders who've recently done billion-dollar deals. We have three global strategics who are in the hunt for these companies and have purchased one of those. And we have a seasoned investment banker who's done over 100 deals as an advisor. So having these different perspectives should make for a very interesting discussion of the nuances of merger and acquisition. So let's get into it. I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves. I'll start. I'm Bob Avery from California Retina. I work with Visionary Ventures and also in Focus. And my co-moderator, Raj. Why don't we start with you, Raj, and then work our way down with introductions.
Sure. Thanks for everybody being here, and we're looking forward to a great discussion. I'm Rajpal, cornea cataract refractive surgeon, and I'm the Chief Strategy and Medical Officer for Horizon Surgical. Pravin, you want to go next? And I would ask you to just maybe everybody just mention a little bit of what you may have done in prior life in terms of, since we're talking about M&A, any transactions also.
Yeah, thanks, Raj and Bob, and thanks for having me here, and Gil and Ellen, and congratulations on a great meeting. My name is Pravin Dugel. I'm the CEO, Chair, and President of Ocular Therapeutix. In my previous life, I was always wanting to be Alan Ho. I'm a retina specialist by training.
Hi, I'm David Geyer, CEO of EyeBio, a subsidiary of Merck and Company. And previous to that, I was in academic medicine, chair at NYU, and then CEO and founder of EyeTech and Ophthalmic Avery.
Thanks, everybody. Alan, Gil, thank you for having us here today. Appreciate it. It's always nice being on the stage in front of this audience. Andrew Gitkin, Senior Managing Director at Leerink Partners, focused on healthcare, but largely a lot of our work is in ophthalmology across drug and device.
Hi, thank you for having me today and the interest in this discussion. My name is Peter Sandor, Head of Strategy of Astellas Pharmaceuticals. We are an innovation-based specialized pharma marketing Avery on the market from a past acquisition, and in my role I have been involved in multiple large or small transactions, research collaborations, and acquisitions in the past.
Hi, Laurent Attias, Senior Vice President for an ophthalmology company you may have heard of, Alcon, and I have the chance to lead corporate development strategy, which includes all the BD&L and M&A activity.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for inviting me as well. I'm Esther Melo, and I work at Roche Genentech in the Corporate Business Development Department. I'm a Business Development Director, and I take care of research collaborations, licensing, but also M&A, and that's the reason why I'm here today. Looking forward.
Great.
So thank you, everybody. To kick it off, since we're here to talk about strategic pathways, what are the options for ultimately either acquisition or other pathways for funding along the way? Maybe we'll start with Andrew, since you get a chance to see so many different deals, transactions, and be engaged in them. Tell us your thoughts on maybe the ecosystem in general, how it's doing from that perspective, and also where maybe the opportunities are, especially as we think of our audience of people that are involved in that innovation space, entrepreneurs who want to understand what paths should they take.
Thank you. Well, I think from my perspective as a banker, I couldn't be happier to have found ophthalmology as a sector to be involved with. And just having been at these meetings for so many years, the room gets bigger and bigger, and it gets more and more filled. And if that's not a sign of the healthy ecosystem, I don't know what it is. So even from like a tangible perspective, these meetings have become much more vibrant, much more dynamic. At a high level, I think innovation and the ecosystem continues to be very strong, and I would say maybe has never been stronger. From my seat, we have the fortunate opportunity to meet with companies earlier in their life cycle, even well before there's quote unquote a deal to do, and we're seeing innovation sort of being born and capital coming to those ideas, and that happens week in and week out, and we're happy to see that. And as those companies evolve and progress, there's opportunities to go public. We've seen very successful examples of that in the last couple of years, and also M&A. So I think there continues to be a very vibrant, healthy ecosystem. I think one of the very important aspects to keep that innovation going and the interest going, I would, at a personal level, like to see a bit more participation from the investment community at large. We still tend to finance from a pretty consistent set of investors, and it's been good, but when you compare it to, let's say, oncology or inflammation and immunity or neuro, broadly speaking, it's a much larger opportunity set, of course, but it's also more investors tend to participate. And so I always sort of like to say a call to arms is to try to expand our messaging and try to bring more investors, broadly speaking, to the industry so that we can continue to nurture all this great innovation that's happening day in and day out, particularly as it reaches, clinical development and the dollars get bigger, particularly when you're in retina, for example, and the studies cost more money and take more time. There's additional pools of capital that we could benefit from. The other nice thing I would say, just from an observation standpoint, and it ties into your question, Raj, is from a transactional perspective, we've certainly seen deal structures at large, as a generic statement, sort of exist, very well with and synergistically with innovation at various stages. Alcon, does a fantastic job of partnering with companies early on in their life cycle and providing capital and expertise. And we're seeing other companies do that as well to nurture that development. And so I think deal structures have also evolved over the last couple of years, where you're seeing companies partner with strategics perhaps earlier in lieu of capital, because again, the investor pool isn't as large as I'd like to see it, and still continue to advance programs. So all in all, I think it's very, very healthy.
I'd like to follow up on that with a question for basically everyone about how the deals should be structured, what you should go for if you're one of the many people out here in the audience that's an entrepreneur and has a company. We heard earlier today about the decreased IPOs, decreased funding available from VCs, and we also heard that it may help to have a strategic partnership early, as you just mentioned, to get early funding. And yet we also have people here who hit the home run with billion-dollar sales. The question really I pose is, what is the best way to steer your company and under which circumstances? That is, are you interested in trying to do a build to buy where you get money up front and you get that partnership with the strategic and you get the funding that's hard to find, but you have a deal where you can be bought for a certain amount upon certain milestones? Or do you try to go the way I think Dave and Pravin have done, where you raise VC capital and sell the whole thing, go the whole way? What do people feel about what is the best way under these circumstances to position your company? Pravin, you nodded, you start.
So Bob, I don't think that question is sort of a binary thing of saying, do you do this or do you do that? Being an outsider coming into this late in my career, and from the last deal, I tell you, there's some really interesting things that I think I've learned that's applicable no matter what size of company you have. The first thing is to understand that I think you've got to be completely unemotional in the process. That's the first. The second thing is that I think you've got to be intensely strategic. And the third thing is, much like our clinical trials, I think you've got to be completely data-driven, and the data will tell you exactly what to do. And the data is actually, there's some data pieces that are very straightforward that may surprise a lot of people out there, not the panelists, but people out there. And let me just throw some at you. One is that the first NBO, or non-binding offer, wins in about 80% of the cases. The second is that in the vast majority, over 80% as well, there's only one bidder. However, if you're fortunate enough to cultivate, and I use that word very carefully and deliberately, cultivate, because it's a relationship world, more than one bidder, your reward potentially increases greatly. So if you've got one bidder, the average bump up from the initial NBO is about 3%. But if you've got more than one bidder, the bump up from the initial NBO is over 40%. So if you're able to cultivate more than one bidder, your potential reward is really quite high. The other fact also is that things happen really quickly. It takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months to do due diligence, but with the NBO, the time to actual acquisition is less than 4 weeks, usually about 3 to 4 weeks. So things happen really quickly. And the last fact, which I think is actually the most important and always ignored, is that in large deals that are over $1 billion, the vast majority, over 65% of companies that are acquired have done a cash raise before the deal. Let's just think about that for a second. Have done a cash raise before the deal. So what does all this mean? Well, what it means is that it's not an auction. And that's what I used to think when I was on the other side, right? I used to think, well, you got good data, there'll be people running to you. It doesn't always work that way. And if it does, you may not be getting the best deal. It's really a relationship world. It's cultivating a relationship that may require years and years. At the end of the day, everybody's got to win. You're going to win in front of your board, but your acquirer also has to win in front of his or her board. So it's got to be a win-win relationship, and that's the key, that it's a relationship. The second is that things happen really quickly. So you better have your house in order. You better make sure that your board is completely aligned. The bankers are completely aligned. The lawyers are completely aligned. You've done scenario planning so that you're completely in order when this happens, because when it happens, if you're lucky enough to happen, it happens really quickly. And the last thing that I would say, which is probably the most important thing, is you're going to have to be willing to say no. Deals are done, and as they say, companies aren't sold, they're bought. Right? So you've got to make absolutely certain that your company is structured in a way that it can go do it alone. You have to have the leverage to say, look, no, we're going to go and do it alone. You've got to have the structure to do that. You've got to have the capital to do that, because if you don't, you lose all leverage. So I know there's a lot of stuff that I said over there. Happy to dig into any of those things, but I think those are the most important.
Great insights. Dave, you got your...
I would just add, I think one of the most important things is you have to build your company to go long. It's really hard to predict a situation of when an M&A may come. And so, build it to get approval, build it to commercialize. As an example, on boards that I've been an independent board member of, whenever we've tried to force a sale or make a sale happen, it usually doesn't happen. And on the other end, when we have done an M&A, it often happens by an unusual chance event. I'll give you one anecdote. In iTech, we had no desire to sell the company. We were going to commercialize, and once we went public, I wanted to add to the board. So I wanted to get a pro-management friendly board member, CEO of another company, Colin Goddard. And we all interviewed him. We wanted to add him to the board. So I took him out to dinner to make the offer to join our board. And I'll never forget, he picked up a wine glass, took a sip of wine, and said, "Let me throw you a curveball. What if I buy you instead of joining your board?" Came out of nowhere. And so to me, it's important, go long, build the company. It also, as Pravin alluded to, if you've done a fundraising or you're strong financially or you show that you have the team that can take this all the way, it makes you much more attractive. And also, as Pravin said, once you do get that first offer, then you need to go into auction mode to really maximize things.
So let's modify the question now a little bit, because obviously we've had the entrepreneur's perspective, and it's great on a personal level to have ophthalmologists giving that perspective who have been successful. But now from the industry and strategic side, if all three of you can comment on not just what you think is the right pathway or a reasonable pathway to consider from the beginning, but also just the steps along the way of where you've seen the most success, but also maybe some challenges. And maybe, Peter, you can start.
beyond the obvious that the data has to be at least promise clear differentiation in the future market, and we have to agree on what's behind this data, how reliable is what we see, and what are the next steps in development or commercialization. It helps to get to the right agreement and deal structure if it is clear what type of capabilities we can offer, which accelerates the development. So it has to be synergistic, and it's the easier ones are the global regulatory or development framework or manufacturing supply network, what the strategic can offer. But even beyond these, there may be technology platforms, for example, robotic manufacturing for cell therapy with high quality standards. If you are very clear about those, then it's easier to structure the deal around those combined capabilities and the expected future growth. In terms of structure and how do we put in place our future, be it M&A or collaboration, it all depends on these factors. Typically, we are very flexible on building a structure which serves the asset, or the technology platform. We need place from joint ventures to full acquisitions, all sorts of collaborations, partnerships, investments, as it is needed, dependent on the company's need and the stage of development. But in order to get to these type of discussions, we need absolute clarity to understand, again, what the data promises, what capabilities you need, and what type of structure serves best the asset moving forward.
Well, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, the uniqueness of this industry is that there's a lot of interaction between the companies, the makers of product, and the people who use it. And I would say there's a bit of nuance when we talk about a pharma asset or a device asset. And because, first of all, there's no cookie cutter approach that we apply at Alcon. Why? Well, because the products are different, the assets are different. So if you take, for example, a device, I believe that both sides benefit from the exchange and the knowledge that is being infused in order to create the success in the asset, in the innovation. So Alcon, we've built several mechanisms of investment that are largely because at different stages of we tend to go now earlier, because what we've noticed, especially in devices, is that both parties benefit from the expertise and the input in order to get to as successful as a product as possible as commercialization, without, in the case of devices, an Alcon having to buy something and then kind of retrofit it or apply all the things, quality, whichever it might be, that the market would expect for the product to be successful. So early exchange without a cookie cutter approach, and we do deals in many, many different ways, but always trying to safeguard and understand where the expertise lies on the other side and provide the complementary expertise for whatever it might be. So that's how, and again, it's a testimony to how this industry behave in the exchange, and that's what we love and foster, and we try to replicate in our M&A effort.
Maybe everything that was said, I think like we would concur on your view, and just to add, what we look, at least at Roche, is really cutting edge science, like many other parties, of course. There needs to be a fit on our strategy, which I think like both points can work on your side. And finally, the third point that is important for us is that we have an aligned vision and that we have like a good cultural fit. And I believe that even if you are early, it's important to start the dialogue, as you were saying before, so that you can see on whether you have this common view and you are seeing you are going to advance the program in the same manner, so that if technically you are not yet there, when the data will be there, at least that point is checked already.
So I guess I have a slightly different question for the corporations here. how do you decide what to invest in? Specifically, are you trying to fill a hole in your portfolio, or do you look for a disease? Let's say, do you look for a disease that you want to find a company with the compound for, or do you look for the mechanism itself? You say, oh, well, someone's figured out that this is an important pathway that could be applicable in diseases. Do you tend to favor one over the other, and what is your sort of MO in that regard? Do you tend to look for, say, like, Dave sort of thought VEGF was a good pathway like 25 years ago, and that really worked quite well for everyone in the room. Or do you say, oh, well, geographic atrophy, that's a disease that Peter's company bought, $6 billion from the other guy down there. So what do you look at? And then in that regard, we can go into the specifics of what the companies have to have, but how do you direct your search?
I can go maybe. So I think on our end, we have a very clear strategy. So we know very well what indications are in scope and what's a bit more opportunistic, if you want. And also within the indications, we understand as well very well what we are looking for in terms of modes of action or also modalities. So there are a little bit of guardrails in there, but that doesn't mean that we cannot go a little bit off-road, and we are always vigilant. So if there are new modes of action, if there is cutting-edge science and something that was not anticipated and is going off and not on the anti-VEGF, for example, as you mentioned, we'll look at that as well. So I think it's a little bit of a combination at the end of the day.
We have two levels. We have a macro strategy level for our external innovation. It starts with obviously white spaces that we might not be in ophthalmology. If you recall, Alcon was not in surgical glaucoma, and then we did a deal with Adventis, so we did it also with Belkin, and so we entered surgical glaucoma, which was a white space. On another macro level, we would look at what internal programs we have and what you saw Franck here earlier, what we would need in order to complement an existing program, because we don't hold all the technologies that he might need, and therefore we'll try to outsource that. And then we'll look at our portfolio gaps as well, where we might have a gap. Recently also we entered some of the biometry with the Argos, for example. Why did we need that? Because we have IOLs. We want to make sure we get the best data, and so we complemented this. So this is kind of at the macro level. On the execution side, we have a trifecta of the commercial, R&D, and BD&L and M&A. And we sit down actually now and establish a priority list, very detailed by franchise, and it becomes our hunting list or our menu for the upcoming year. And so we're about to review this, and we'll have a list of by segment, by product line for surgical, for vision care, et cetera. And then that's how we embark on the execution of those strategies.
So we look at this from a portfolio perspective first. Where do we have areas, core areas, where we understand the biology, we understand the global marketplace, we can compete with the capabilities what we have, we can supply the drugs. If we are talking about these core areas, then we like to see deals where we can contribute to the assets. We know the biology, or we know the market, and we can help to grow the program and bring it to patients. Of course, there are areas where we are looking to extend these, as we are looking into blindness as a disease area where we have capabilities right now. We are looking into, for example, cell and gene delivery technologies to do even better in the very same disease area. And as you have mentioned, there are areas, white spaces, where we are looking for future growth, which can go off into different areas. In order to coordinate this, it all comes down to capital allocation policies within the company, and then how do we prioritize the deals across different therapeutic areas. Again, the most important is the clarity and the contribution what we can provide to the programs, what we partner with you at any time.
So let's turn to the pathway. Again, that's kind of how we labeled this session. And I promise we did not put all the strategics and the early stage companies on separately with the banker in the middle, but it actually works out pretty well. So from the strategic side, when do you like to see some of the early stage companies coming to you with a banker, or how do they best keep the relationship with you? And on the early stage company side, when is the right time to engage a banker, or how do you, Pravin, to your point, keep that relationship going to be able to ultimately have a transaction? And then Andrew, at the end, you get to say why a banker should be involved all the time.
Well, I mean, you're right. I think a banker should be involved all the time, or bankers as well as lawyers. And now I can't open a window without 13 lawyers, so I think they're involved all the time anyway. But having said all of that, in a company's evolution, I think the leader of the company has to recognize how to define the company, first of all, right? I mean, a small company like ours, for instance, can't have a pipeline the size of Pfizer. You have to have an identity for the company. And somebody has to look at your company and say, okay, this is what your company does, and this is the identity. And just as the strategics would, or anybody else would, or a potential partner would. The other thing also is that you also have to realize that in the development of a company, there may be windows of opportunity where there's a partnership, there's a takeout, whatever it may be. But having said all that, again, as I said earlier on, companies aren't sold, they're bought. So you've got to build a company to go all the way. But you've got to also recognize that there are windows. The last thing that I'll say is I think what's really underappreciated is that there's an absolute inflection point of a company that's a small company that goes from development to commercialization. And I don't think very many people understand what that means. At least I didn't when I came here or when I was in the other company. A company changes drastically from development to commercialization. The entire mindset changed, the people change, the entire company changes. Development is fun, that's what we do all the time. But when you commercialize, you suddenly become an accountant, right? Now you're counting every single vial, you're counting every single drop, and the entire mentality has to change. And there are not very many companies in our field. In fact, there's one company, and David may know of others, but there's one company that I know of in our field, and it's one that you all know, at least in pharmacology, where the value of the company has actually increased from going from development to commercialization, and that's Regeneron. And that's it. I don't know of any other. I mean, just think about that. That's how difficult it is. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but everybody wants to be Regeneron. As much as I love Len and George, not very many people can be Regeneron. But it's really important for a leader of a company to recognize, look, here are the inflection points, here are the challenges, and here's how I'm going to set up this company to go all the way knowing that these challenges do occur. And for that, you absolutely need bankers, you need lawyers, you need friends, you need mentors, you need people, colleagues, et cetera, but you have to have the company in order.
Yeah, I would just add, to me, again, the number one goal for a small biotech has to be day-to-day operations, get the data, run the company. And so I don't really like to, do a lot of due diligence unless I think it's incredibly serious. And what that usually means is a champion at a very senior level. So we might do some diligence and then we'd say, we'd really like to see a very senior person of the organization come to a meeting or show us interest, and then we believe it's real. Because a lot of other times it can be a very junior fishing expedition, often even to just get intelligence for internal pipelines. So to me, that's what's really important, to see the signal from the strategic that someone very high up knows about the deal and is showing interest. That makes a big difference in the amount of time I would give a strategic. As far as the banker, personally, again, because the day-to-day running of a company with a small number of people, it takes up a lot of time. I think it's when you get that first term sheet. And then you turn to the banker to take that term sheet to then go into the auction mode and help you meet other strategics that might be interested.
Following up for a sec, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask Andrew, since you advise a lot of companies early in this stage, when you're a small company or smaller company and you're going to the big behemoths with your ideas and stuff, when do you address that? Are they really doing due diligence, or are they just window shopping, or just trying to get, as Dave said, intelligence for their internal process? How do you advise companies in that? Is that a question you face all the time? Or?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It builds upon what David was just saying. I think real diligence and real interest has a look and a feel to it, and I would certainly echo that there's multi-level interest being expressed by the counterparty, if you will, both at the business unit level, but also there's involvement from the senior level as well. That I think shows an earnestness of interest beyond just competitive diligence or window shopping, so to speak. I think as you're in the process of interacting with the strategic, I think if you observe that their deal team is growing in terms of number of people with different functions, so it spreads beyond the initial evaluation team and it expands into different functional aspects, again with leadership involved. I think that's a bona fide signal of real interest. I think if you start also either being involved with or hearing secondhand that there's independent, for lack of a better word, channel checks going on. You get a call from an investigator, you get a call from a clinician, KOL, that also shows, I think, real interest as well. Then at some point, the diligence begins to look not so much about just diligencing the science, the opportunity, but it becomes more transactional. And questions around diligence around capital structure, for example, integration type questions. Those are all hallmark signs of real interest. And then just to maybe close the loop on some of the points made earlier, in terms of getting a banker involved, I'd like to say all the time, no conflicts. But I would say this, I think most of our successful deals, at least that I've been involved with, it really started well before there was a deal to do. So there's an informal aspect of developing a dialogue with a banker who may be an expert in a certain area, and they just become someone else, as Pravin talked about, someone to bounce ideas off of, part of the team, there to sort of maybe guide along the way, and as part of the company's sort of strategic direction, and both on the capital side and on the strategic advisory side. And then there's usually a pretty clear point when it becomes, and you sort of, one of those things, you know it when you see it. It's time to hire a banker. Certainly a term sheet is certainly a clear sign of that. And even at that point, a banker can be involved formally, but stay in the background. Putting a banker sometimes in between conversations prematurely can do more damage. It takes away, I think, from the collegiality of the conversations. It begins to smell more like a transaction. And then at some point when the auction process starts, it makes sense to bring a banker.
Yeah, can I also just say that getting an offer is not always a good thing. And that's a really important thing to understand. Sometimes getting an offer, regardless of the amount, I shouldn't say that. Getting an offer at the wrong time is actually very detrimental to both parties. And as I said earlier on, in the vast majority of deals, there's one bidder. So you've got one partner, one potential partner, and your goal is to guide that partner. It's not an auction. It really is more like a kabuki dance. It's building a relationship, and if you're going to get a NBO, realize that that CEO has gone to his or her board to get a figure, to get an offer, to come to you. Now, if that's wrong, and you think that it's way low or whatever it may be, later on you're expecting that person to go back again and saying, you know what, I was wrong the first time, and here I am coming with a much bigger offer. That puts that person in a very, very difficult position in front of their board. That's the wrong guidance on your side, right? So it's really important to understand that you're not out there just looking for bids and offers. You're really looking for a relationship where it's a win-win situation, where if you're going to get an offer, you've guided the person so that he or she can win just like you can win. And just getting an offer sometimes is the wrong thing. You really, it's all about timing, it's all about relationship. You want to make sure that you get an offer at the right time with the proper relationship.
So Pravin, I'd like to pick up on that. You're absolutely right about the timing. And this is where I would say, obviously bankers play an important role, but there must be alignment also. A strategic is going to try to get the company to focus on the product and the development, not so much as to what creates a value creation event, right? And so when we invest with a purpose to get something de-risked at a certain stage. And that's what you have the harmony between the innovator and the strategic. There could be some differences in opinion as to the timing when a banker is involved, because they're going to look at value creation events differently. We don't want the CEO to focus and worry about the money. We're fortunate to be able to fund, and therefore we want their heads down on the product and doing the development. So.
And just to add to this, if I can, we see very often that companies are asking for numbers even before we get into scientific discussion, non-binding term sheet, letter of intent, which anchors very early in the process certain values. So we would much more prefer to have a discussion, validate some assumptions, understand what it is, what we are talking about, understand your needs as well, and then come to the numbers.
So we do need to wrap up, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone heard Laurent's comment. He has the money, and nobody needs to worry. Everyone can keep proceeding. But I do want to thank everybody. We've had a great discussion, and obviously there will be opportunity for having much more personal discussions during the networking sessions and lunch. But we have a great session upcoming with the Winning Pitch Challenge with Vance Thompson and Julie Shalhorn running that. So thank you again, and let's welcome them up on stage.